The winds have run us aground in this infernal bay, he thought to himself. He could see light strewn about the coastline and knew immediately the weight of the situation. We have a choice between the Englishmen on the shore or the mercy of the open sea in a longboat. He thought not of king nor country, but of his only respite in life, and instinctively grasped the large golden cross hanging around his neck on ribbon and leather. The odds have never been in my favor, he thought, but the Englishmen will have to do. Louis Pecton was a valued member of the community in Bordeaux. He was a loyal veteran soldier of the French army, an active advocate for the poor, and a medical doctor. Dr. Pecton graciously gave medical care to anyone in need, regardless of whether they could pay for his services or not. He is not, however, the hero of this story. On one stormy evening, Dr. Pecton and his wife had retired for the evening when they were suddenly disturbed by a vigorous knock upon their door. Dr. Pecton assumed it was someone in need and quickly prepared himself to deliver medical care. He opened the door and hurriedly invited in the single stranger standing in the rain before him. Dr. Pecton immediately noticed that the man moved and carried himself like a noble, but wore the clothing of a commoner. The two men settled in, and the doctor was able to get a better look at the stranger by the candlelight. The doctor's eyes widened. He knew this man. Before he could act, the stranger moved his hair to the side and turned his cheek, revealing a small, star-shaped scar on the side of his head, and spoke. "Yes, it is I, good doctor, but please do not stand. There is no need to honor a man whose titles and lands are forsaken." Dr. Pecton anxiously shifted in his seat and politely asked, as he always did, "How can I help you?" The stranger thought for a moment, his sad eyes shifting towards the fire dancing around the wick of the candle. "My good doctor, you know who I am. You know what has befallen my family. And just as you know me, I know you." The stranger mustered his strength and returned his gaze to the doctor's own. "You are a good man, and possess a great compassion that is lost in this current year of our Lord. I come to you begging a favor for which I can never repay. I have bore a son, and not so much longer after he left his mother's womb, she was slain. My life will be forfeit as well, for I am a doomed man. If you want to show me respect, do so by serving me. Take my son, and let him pass as your own. Raise him to be a man of faith, and teach him your profession. He was baptized as Francis. Honor him by giving him your honest surname, and if he never knows any other, he will be far happier than if he had his father's historic titles. For your service, I will give you 200 louis d'ors, and once a year I will make contact. If I fail to do so, surely you can know that I have perished." Dr. Pecton was stunned. He thought for a moment, and then sought his wife to discuss the matter. After a long discussion, Dr. Pecton returned to the stranger's company. "Monsieur, I will accept this endeavor. I lost my son, but God has given me another. He will be my heir, and I will raise him according to your wishes." The stranger's eyes showed relief, but no less sadness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gleaming golden cross attached to an ornately embroidered ribbon. "My good doctor, please take this and give it to my son. Tell him to wear it always. Tell him it is all he will ever need in this world. I have failed him, but the Father above will never." The stranger stood up, gently bowed his head, and graciously thanked the doctor. He then walked out of the home and back into the rain, never to be seen or heard from again. Later that evening, the infant Francis was delivered to the Pecton home by a wet nurse, along with the promised money. The Pectons looked upon their son for the first time and felt nothing but unconditional love. 25 years later, Francis has become a brilliant and athletic young man. His father has trained him in his profession, and the Pecton doctors have worked side by side for a few years. He is noted by his community for being particularly light-hearted and cheerful, and for never being seen separate from his necklace with a large gold cross, a Pecton family heirloom as he knows it. His mother has passed on, and his father has been ill for some time. Eventually, Dr. Louis Pecton becomes bedbound and knows that his death will soon come for him. On one particular evening, upon returning from work, Francis is called to his father's side. His father, frail and weak, takes Francis's hand. "Francis, you are my son. You have brought me more joy than any other endeavor in my life. You did the same for your mother when she was still with us. There is something I must tell you that I believe you have a right to know." Dr. Louis Pecton told his son the truth of his birth, the fate of his biological parents, and the history of his real family to the extent that he knew. Not a few hours later, Dr. Louis Pecton passed away, his son never having left his side. Young Francis was hollowed out inside. Now a double orphan with no other family, he was truly alone for the first time in his life. Dr. Francis Pecton kept to his duties, as his adoptive father would have wanted. But his patients soon noticed a distinct change in his personality. The light-hearted cheer had left him and would not return to him for some time. One day, not long after his adoptive father's death, Francis realized he could stay in France no longer. There was nothing but loss here. Everything had been taken from him. The family he knew and the family he didn't know. His lands and titles and wealth, and even his very God-given name. Francis decided that day to be a victim no more. There can be no restitution for what was taken, but there could be a reckoning. He was a noble without a name, a baron without any lands. What he did have was his adoptive father's good and honest name, a name that he could not bear to sully in his personal crusade to come. As his name was stolen from him when he was merely an infant, Francis repaid that insult in kind by stealing a name from the nobility that had destroyed his family. "I will be a nameless baron, but a baron nonetheless," he must have thought. And on that day, Dr. Francis Pecton became Francis LeBaron. Francis LeBaron sold his adoptive father's estate and liquidated any remaining inheritance he had received. Now bound to honor two fathers, he still always kept his third father in the heavens close. He gave half of his wealth to the poor and the church without a second thought. With the other half, LeBaron bought a stake in a privateer ship called l'Aigle, or the Eagle. Beginning in 1688, the Kingdom of France entered into a wide-scale conflict with the Grand Alliance, consisting of England, Scotland, the Dutch Republic, the Holy Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, and the Savoyard estate. In the New World, the conflict was called King William's War, and was fought between the colonies of France and England, as well as their respective Native American alliances. The Wabanaki, the Algonquin, and the Kahnawake supported New France, while the Mohicans and the Iroquois supported New England. Due to his origin, Francis LeBaron held no love for the French monarchy, nor even for his own country. What did interest Francis, however, was a particular financial opportunity that only war provided: legal piracy. The crown allowed French sailors, called corsairs, to raid and pillage the English to their heart's desire, as long as it was done in the name and to the benefit of King Louis the Great. This was a common practice all across Europe, and many of the legendary pirates known today started as privateers. Despite being a man of deep faith, Francis decided to have a taste of the sweet thievery that had plagued his family. He could never recover the wealth and the honor of his family, but perhaps he could steal his own as a corsair of the open sea. By most accounts, the Eagle and her crew enjoyed a period of moderate success, raiding English merchant vessels up and down the coasts of New England. On one fateful day in 1694, the winds turned and forced the Eagle into Buzzards Bay, a bay sandwiched between the coast of Massachusetts, the Elizabeth Islands, and with Cape Cod to the east. Now in unfamiliar waters, much closer to shore than normal, the ship eventually ran aground. The crew of the Eagle, including Francis LeBaron, decided to take their chances on land with the English, rather than risk the roughly 3,000-mile sail home in a longboat on the open ocean. Due to the ongoing war, the French crew was almost immediately captured by English militiamen upon making their way to shore. Through a rugged language barrier on both sides, the French privateers were told that they would be safe from immediate execution, but would be marched northward to Boston to stand trial for piracy. Chained and marched along at the barrel of a musket, the captured French crew and the English militiamen began the nearly 60-mile trek from Buzzards Bay to Boston. Between Buzzards Bay and Boston was the perfect midway point of Plymouth, the now legendary landing place of the Mayflower over 70 years before. Stopping in Plymouth for a night of rest before completing the journey, the crew of the Eagle and the militiamen were quartered in the home of a prominent colonial family, most likely the family of William Barnes. It was here at this great colonial home that Francis LeBaron must have felt as though fortune had finally favored him for the first time in his life. There was a sudden stirring in the house that awoke the crew and their captors. Muffled shouts and a cantankerous thunder of footsteps bellowed through the walls. A group of well-dressed English colonists barged into the area where the French were being held and began speaking with the English militiamen. Their faces were stern, and their speech was rushed and frantic. Our execution may have been expedited, the corsairs must have thought. One of the militiamen turned towards the pirates and asked, "Is there a ship's doctor among you? Le médecin?" Francis's blood must have run cold as he stood up. He was quickly escorted to a different home nearby, and his services were requested for a young woman of an esteemed family within the community. The young woman had suffered a compound fracture in one of her legs, and Plymouth was currently without a doctor. In the 17th century, a fracture of any part of the lower extremities was usually a death sentence. The only mainstream treatment at the time was amputation. At only 26 years old, and in 1694, Dr. Francis LeBaron somehow saved the woman's leg as well as her life, becoming known as the Pirate Doctor of Plymouth. The selectmen and prominent members of the Plymouth community immediately petitioned Magistrate William Stroughton for Francis's release and pardon. As Plymouth desperately needed a physician, this was granted. The fate of Francis's crewmates is unknown, but it is likely that they were marched the rest of the way to Boston and executed after trial. From doctor to pirate to doctor once again, Francis LeBaron became a prominent member of the Plymouth community. A year after his profession saved his life, he married an English colonist named Mary Wilder, and together they bought a lot near the center of town and built a large home. They filled that home with 3 sons, Lazarus, James, and Francis. To give his son the name Lazarus is an interesting note. Lazarus is a figure from the Christian Bible, a man who was resurrected from the dead by Jesus as an example of God's power and work. Perhaps Francis LeBaron felt that he had been given a second chance in life, a chance at redemption. Even after casting his faith aside in favor of piracy, even after allowing hate and vengeance to enter his heart, God spared his life and gave him a beautiful wife, a new home, and 3 good sons. According to accounts from the time, the light-hearted cheerfulness of his youth returned to Francis. And just as in France, and like his father before him, Francis was a stalwart protector of the poor and the downtrodden. All who came to him received care, whether they could pay or not. Notably, in 1699, he held the hand of Mary Allerton Cushman, the last surviving member of the initial Mayflower landing in 1620. She was only 10 years old then, dying with Francis by her side at 89 years old. By God's grace, Francis enjoyed this second chance at life for 10 years. In 1704, at the age of 36, Dr. Francis LeBaron passed away from an unknown disease. For nearly 150 years after his death, the primary physician for the Plymouth area was a LeBaron. His son Lazarus and his grandson Lazarus II being prominent examples. Many of his descendants who did not become doctors chose the path of the Lord instead, becoming priests or pastors. Francis LeBaron, for all we could possibly know, never revealed his real name to any member of his family. According to some accounts, he did suggest that it was a name that even the English colonists would know. The account detailed previously came from a descendant, a story passed down many years after he died. Many descendants have posited more fantastical accounts, such as that his future wife Mary harbored him safely, and that she petitioned Governor Stroughton for his release, personally and alone. What most likely happened is what transpired previously. Francis LeBaron was a French pirate who raided the coastal areas of New England. Once captured, by the grace of him being able to perform a successful surgery, he was pardoned by the new English government. Here's an 1832 account by Plymouth town physician and historian James Thatcher, nearly 130 years later. A French privateer, fitted out at Bordeaux, cruising on the American coast, was wrecked in Buzzards Bay. The crew were carried prisoners to Boston. The ship's surgeon, Dr. Francis LeBaron, came to Plymouth, and having performed a surgical operation, and the town being at the time destitute of a physician, the selectmen petitioned the executive Lieutenant Governor Stroughton for his liberation, that he might settle down in the town. This was granted, and he married Mary Wilder, and practiced physicianship here during his life, but died in 1704 at the early age of 36 years. What we know of Francis's origin for sure is that he was a Frenchman living under an assumed name, and that he was a political dissident of some sort. The Kingdom of France produced a number of interesting and tragic backgrounds that could have absolutely have been Francis's origin story. From 1635 to 1653, for over 18 years, the Kingdom of France experienced a series of civil wars referred to as the Fronde. The various princes of the kingdom, the nobility, and the French common folk banded together to face the tyranny of Louis XIV. Their grievances were primarily focused upon the extremely costly and extremely deadly 30 Years' War, and the sudden and heavy tax increase to pay for the war. The Fronde consisted of both physical battles in the streets of France as well as political battles in the lower courts. Ultimately, the combined forces of the nobility and the common folk failed. Louis XIV crushed his political rivals, built the palace at Versailles, and forced the leading members of the nobility to live there where their actions could be closely monitored. This created the state of absolute monarchy in France that did not end until the French Revolution. Louis XIV was designated Louis the Great, the Sun King. In his own words, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state. The family of Francis LeBaron could have easily been one of these subjugated noble families. With his newfound autocratic powers, King Louis XIV sought to further streamline political and social power in France. This included the practice of religion. The Kingdom of France was a Catholic nation, but was home to a substantial population of Protestants. French Calvinist Protestants were referred to as Huguenots, a term with a clouded origin that likely started as a kind of slur. A series of failed rebellions against the French Catholic crown in the 1620s decimated their populations. Their persecution culminated in the 1685 Edict of Fontainebleau, under which King Louis XIV revoked all rights and powers of the Protestant citizenry. Most Huguenots were exiled from the nation. It is quite possible that Francis LeBaron came from a persecuted Huguenot family. Francis LeBaron was a man of duality. He was a doctor and a pirate. He was a nobleman and a commoner. He was a Frenchman and an Englishman. He was a Christian, yet let hate enter into his heart. A testament to the power of faith and a glaring reminder that not all those who falter from the path are lost. Not unlike the story of Job from the Old Testament, Francis could not steal back what was taken, nor could revenge satisfy the hole in his heart. Instead, what he desired most was simply given to him, returned as a divine gift. And just as Job, his wealth, his health, and his family doubled. His grave can still be seen to this day at Burial Hill in Massachusetts, surrounded by his many friends, descendants, and all those whose lives were forever changed by the pirate doctor of Plymouth.